Each story has its own roots, going deep into the past. This one is no exception. The events began casually, but every decision, every action of the characters led them to consequences that became a waking nightmare. Lucas was a man of action. He worked for a construction company and had many successful projects under his belt. However, the last order he took was a bit strange. The client insisted on complete confidentiality and asked that the work be carried out at night. It was a huge abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of an industrial area. It was important to the customer that the warehouse was prepared for a new project, cleaning, strengthening walls, and building several additional rooms. When Lucas first arrived at the place, he was struck by the atmosphere. The warehouse wasn't just abandoned. It seemed abandoned in a hurry. There were old folders, scraps of documents, and remnants of packaging on the floor. A wooden shelf with boxes sealed with wax was found near one of the walls. None of Lucas's team dared to touch them. The job was already difficult, and unnecessary questions could lead to delays. A week later, they found a staircase leading to the basement. The customer did not mention the basement, but Lucas decided that it would be an additional bonus. When the workers started to go downstairs, they noticed that the air was getting humid and the walls were covered with a thin layer of mold. The basement turned out to be larger than one might have expected. They were whole tunnels going far into the depths. Lucas called the customer to report the discovery, but he unexpectedly asked to continue working and not document anything. This decision seemed strange, but the money that was being offered was too good to refuse. Over the next 2 weeks, workers repeatedly heard strange noises from the tunnels. Lucas was a rational man and believed that it was just the wind or the echo of their work. However, one day one of his employees disappeared. The disappearance of a worker, a guy named Jason, was the first alarm signal. Lucas had been trying to find him for a long time. He called the phone, inspected the area with the others, even checked Jason's car, which was still parked at the warehouse. But there are no traces. Work stopped that night. The team decided to return in the morning with the hope that the guy just left without warning. However, Jason did not show up the next day. Lucas called the police, but could not answer their questions clearly. He didn't know where the guy could have gone or why he just disappeared. Nevertheless, the work continued. The customer insisted that there be no delays and even offered to double the payment. This was a decisive factor for the team, which agreed to return to the tunnels. On the 4th day after Jason disappeared, a group of workers came across a huge metal door at the farthest end of the tunnel. It looked unusual, massive, with rusty hinges and a handle like a steering wheel. There was an electric switchboard next to the door, which had obviously not been working for a long time. However, there was something about that door that worried everyone. Lucas decided not to touch her, but as soon as he turned away, one of the workers, Mark, tried to turn the wheel. The door didn't budge, but a sharp screech cut through the tunnel, causing everyone to freeze. At that moment, a sound like a distant rustling came from somewhere in the depths. "They're just rats," Lucas said, trying to calm the team down. But no one answered. All eyes were fixed on the door, which began to vibrate slightly. That night, Lucas decided to take a break. They locked the warehouse and went home, but the sleep turned out to be restless. Lucas tossed and turned in bed for a long time, remembering the sounds from the tunnel. He dreamed of Jason calling for help, but he couldn't find him. The next day, Lucas decided to call an engineer to examine the door. When he arrived, he inspected the structure for a long time and said that the door was clearly built for insulation. "Isolation from what?" Lucas asked. "The question is, not for what, but for whom?" the engineer replied with a heavy expression on his face. This phrase did not leave Lucas's mind. Whatever was behind the door, he didn't want to find out. He decided to stop the work in the tunnels and focus on the upper levels. But that didn't stop the troubles. On the 3rd night after the meeting with the engineer, another worker, Thomas, disappeared. His tools were still there, but no one saw the guy himself. Lucas began to notice that people were starting to panic. They refused to go down into the tunnels, even for extra money. And then something happened that made Lucas doubt his own sanity. He found the note. It was attached to the inside of his car door. "Leave the warehouse. Last chance." The handwriting was clumsy, as if it had been written in a hurry. Lucas checked the cameras in the parking lot, but didn't notice anything suspicious. The work continued for several more days, but each of them turned into torture. The team worked at the limit of their nerves, and finally one of the workers refused to go down into the tunnels, demanding the immediate end of the contract. Lucas accepted his resignation and stayed with several loyal employees. Lucas decided that the panic in the team was a temporary phenomenon. He knew for sure that if he left everything now, the business would fall apart. The customers' money and the fear of losing the contract overshadowed even the concern for the safety of the workers. He hired new people who were unaware of the incidents and resumed work. On the 5th night after returning to the tunnels, another worker, Edgar, disappeared. But this time it happened in an area where surveillance cameras were installed. Lucas immediately demanded a recording, but what he saw only increased his paranoia. On the screen, Edgar could be seen walking along the wall of the tunnel until he stopped near that massive door. After a few seconds, he turned around as if he had heard someone. Then the camera recorded how he abruptly dropped his tools and, frantically looking around, moved towards the exit. But instead of reaching the stairs, he suddenly disappeared out of sight. The camera didn't capture anything unusual, just an empty tunnel. Lucas could feel the fear growing inside him. He knew perfectly well that the loss of workers would lead to even more problems. Soon, rumors began to spread among the new employees. Some began to claim that they heard distant footsteps in the tunnels when no one was there. Others, that they felt someone's presence. On the 9th day, only Lucas and 2 workers, Jim and Mark, remained in the tunnels. The others refused to return. Lucas, desperate to complete the contract, offered a triple salary, but it did not help. The warehouse was becoming a kind of cursed place for him. The last night has come. Lucas went down into the tunnels with Jim and Mark, deciding to deal with the door once and for all. They brought with them a powerful generator and tools to open it. "If we look at what's in there, it'll all stop," Lucas said firmly. They connected the generator to the dashboard, which was located next to the door. A burst of light illuminated the tunnel. For a moment, it seemed that everything was fine. But when the power went to the lock, the door opened itself with a soft buzz. It was completely unexpected. Jim dropped the lantern, jumping back. "You said it was locked," he shouted at Lucas. Lucas raised the flashlight, aiming the beam inside. Beyond the door was a narrow corridor leading into darkness. Unlike the tunnel itself, the walls here were covered with some kind of shiny, oily coating. There was a disgusting smell in the air. "Let's go take a look around," Lucas said, but his voice was shaking. They stepped inside the corridor. It was getting harder to breathe with every step. Mark, who was walking behind, suddenly stopped. "It's blood," he whispered, looking at the footprints on the floor. All 3 of them froze. The floor was indeed covered with stains that led deeper inside. A few minutes later, they came out into a small room, in the center of which stood a huge metal container. There were inscriptions and strange symbols on its side, obviously not of local origin. "What the hell?" Jim muttered. Lucas came closer, noticing that the lid of the container was ajar. Suddenly, a strong smell came out of him, causing everyone to cough. Inside, Jason's body lay curled up in an unnatural position. The silence was deafening. Then Mark, pale as a sheet, pointed to the walls of the room. There were scratches. Hundreds of scratches. It was as if they were saying that someone, or something, was trying to escape. "We have to leave," Jim growled. But at that moment, footsteps were heard from behind. Turning around, they saw a man in a work uniform. It was Edgar. Only his eyes were empty, and his face was devoid of emotion. "Help me," he whispered before rushing at Lucas. Then a chaotic struggle began. Mark tried to run out of the room, but ran into something in the hallway. Jim screamed as Edgar leaned on Lucas. After a few minutes, silence enveloped the tunnels again. When rescuers arrived, neither Lucas nor his team were there. The only thing they found was the generator turned on, warm to the touch. The tunnel was permanently closed, and the door was welded shut. Those who tried to ask questions were quickly silenced. But the rumors continued anyway. What kind of container is there? Why did people disappear? And what happened to Lucas? A few months later, the place was finally abandoned. The company that financed the project suddenly declared bankruptcy. All references to the tunnels, the contract, and even the lists of workers disappeared from the archives, as if someone had deliberately erased the traces. Locals who heard about the strange events tried to avoid the area. Some claimed to have seen glimpses of light from behind the fences at night. Others swore that they heard muffled sounds, as if someone was trying to get out of the ground. A year after the incident, an amateur team of researchers, inspired by rumors, decided to enter the tunnels. Armed with cameras, they made their way through holes in the fence. Everything that happened next was recorded on their devices. The first shots show the team carefully making their way inside. The tunnels were damp, with rusty fittings and water dripping from the ceiling. One of the researchers joked that it was just an urban legend, and there was nothing special about it, but 20 minutes later they found the door. It was welded shut, but the metal looked fresh, as if it had recently been updated. One of the researchers, holding a camera, approached to examine the inscriptions. "Are these claw marks?" he asked. His friend, shining a flashlight on the door, noticed traces of blood, dried, but still visible at the joints. The abandoned tunnel began to cause them fear. One of the participants wanted to return, but the others persuaded him to continue. Soon, the group came across something even stranger: the remains of Lucas equipment. Rusty tools, broken cameras, and cracked helmets littered the walls. There was something written on one of the helmets, but the paint was worn. When one of the researchers held the helmet up to the light, he read the scratched message. "They didn't come for US. Who are they?" the girl from the group whispered. After about an hour, their camera started picking up strange noises. Thudding footsteps echoed off the walls, even though all the members of the group were standing still. One of the researchers turned his head and managed to say, "We are not alone." At this point, the recording abruptly stops. The police found their car a few days later, abandoned near the fences. The group's belongings were inside, but the researchers themselves never returned. The cameras they took with them were later found in a thrift store, sold by an unknown person. The last recording made by one of the cameras still gives the audience a chill on the skin. The dim light of a flashlight, a trembling frame, a glance at a massive door, and someone's heavy footsteps approaching from the depths of the tunnel. Immediately after that, the camera crashes and the recording stops. A few years after the disappearance of the research group, the incident was almost forgotten. But one day a large developer bought a piece of land where the tunnels were located in order to build a shopping center. The work began quickly: deforestation, leveling of the land, and the study of underground structures. The project was going smoothly until the workers stumbled upon something strange. While trying to dig up one of the sites, the excavator came across a concrete barrier. Its thickness exceeded the standard dimensions of any engineering structure. When geologists were involved in the work, they found a map of old tunnels, as well as a strange subparagraph in the technical documentation. It is forbidden to open the central compartment. Access is only by permission of the top management. Curiosity exceeded caution, and several workers decided to open the barrier on their own. They worked at night to avoid the attention of their superiors. At first, jackhammers were used, then heavy machinery. Soon, the concrete slab began to crack. A massive hatch was found under the barrier, covered with rust, but still sealed. Someone had hand-scratched the words on the lid. "Stop it. This only fueled the interest. One of the workers suggested opening the hatch using a welding machine. The operation took more than an hour, but in the end they managed. What they found inside horrified everyone. The space resembled an improvised bunker. The floor was covered with dried blood, and the walls were scratched, as if someone had been trying to get out for a long time and desperately. In the middle of the room there was a metal table, around which lay pieces of chains. An old magazine was found on the table. The pages were stained and blurred by time, but a few entries could still be read. Entry 1. They make us dig deeper. We are already undermining stability itself. I heard something moving under us. This is not equipment. Entry 4. We lost 2 more. The authorities say it was an accident, but I know it's a lie. Their bodies were mutilated, as if they had been bullied. Entry 7. I saw it. It's not human. It knows we're here, and it's coming to the surface soon. The workers exchanged glances, decided not to touch anything else, and returned to the surface to report the discovery to their superiors. But, to their surprise, the next day the site was closed. The official explanation sounded trite. Additional soil examination is needed. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread around the city. People living near the construction site claimed to hear strange noises at night. Someone was talking about thuds. Someone was talking about groans. Residents of neighboring houses complained of vibration, as if something was moving underground. Soon one of the workers involved in opening the hatch disappeared. His body was found a few days later in the woods nearby, and there were traces of chains on his hands and feet. The investigation did not yield any results, but the reports indicated that the death occurred from unknown causes. The developer decided to close the project. The plot of land was fenced with a high fence, and all the documents on the construction site were suddenly classified. People began to avoid this area. Even local teenagers, who used to like to climb abandoned buildings, avoided the place. But from time to time, someone still decided to get behind the fences. And each time such attempts ended the same way. People either did not return, or they were found in a terrible state, unable to tell what they saw. One day, a video appeared on social media. It was filmed by a young guy who broke into an abandoned site. The camera captured the destroyed tunnels, the hatch leading to the bunker, and something strange in the distance. Movement in a dark corridor. The guy dropped the camera and ran. The video ends, but the last frame freezes on the door with an engraved inscription. "You'll never get out." The place has since been permanently closed. The tunnels were filled with concrete, and the ground was officially declared unusable. However, those who know the story say that if you listen at night, you can hear faint sounds coming from underground. Despite all the warnings and horrors associated with this place, there were people who wanted to make money on this mysterious site. A young team of extreme bloggers, inspired by the stories, decided to use the location to shoot a new project. They knew it would lead to a lot of views, and none of them took the stories seriously. The team penetrated the fences late at night. They armed themselves with flashlights, video cameras, and even drones to film every detail. Their plan was to get to the legendary hatch and show the audience that there is nothing terrible behind it. Everything went smoothly in the beginning. They recorded the opening shots, joked and assured the audience that there were no strange sounds or feelings of fear. But as we approached the old tunnels, the atmosphere began to change. The lights began to dim, although the batteries were fully charged. A strange metallic smell appeared in the air, and every step echoed through the empty corridors. When they reached the hatch, panic began. One of the participants, checking the drone, noticed movement on the screen. He thought it could have been a rat or another small animal, but when the drone's camera got closer, it became clear. It was a man. The figure was badly mutilated, the face resembled a mask of horror, and the body seemed to be turned inside out. The drone dropped sharply, the signal disappeared, and the team froze in silence. But that was just the beginning. One of the bloggers, Mark, was the first to hear footsteps behind him. He turned around sharply, but saw nothing. When the others shone their lanterns into the darkness, the footsteps stopped. The girl from the group, Julia, offered to leave, but Mark insisted on continuing. "It's just the wind. We're here for the show," he said, trying to sound confident. But then they noticed that the hatch was open. Although in previous videos and reports it was reported that it was tightly sealed. It should have been impossible. "We shouldn't go there," one of the participants said in a trembling voice. Mark ignored him and went down first. The others, not wanting to leave him alone, followed him. The bunker looked even more frightening than in the old videos. There were still scratches on the walls, and the floor was covered with stains that should have disappeared long ago. The team moved cautiously until they came across a metal table. There was a note on the table. The paper was old, but the text was clearly legible. "You are already too far away. You can't go back." Julia started screaming. At the same moment, the bunker door slammed shut with a deafening bang. None of them had time to react. They tried to open the door, shouted, beat on the walls, but it was useless. And then the sounds started. At first it sounded like a whisper, but soon it turned into a loud, aggressive roar that made your ears pop. Mark held the camera, trying to record everything that was happening, but the lens was shaking in his hands. When the light from the lanterns began to fade, they realized that something was moving towards them from the depths of the tunnel. The next day, the site was completely cordoned off. None of the team returned. It was only a week later that one of the locals discovered Mark's camera at the entrance to the tunnel. The police declined to comment on the contents of the recording. However, one of the officers who worked with the material let slip to journalists that the latest footage shows the faces of all team members. But their expressions cannot be described in words, a mixture of agony, horror, and something none of them could understand. A month later, the site was completely destroyed, filled with concrete and surrounded by massive steel slabs. The official version of the authorities stated that this was due to the instability of the soil. But those who know the history of this place are sure that there is something left under the concrete slabs, and one day it will find a way out again.